My wife and I moved out to Indiana, to my childhood home, to take care of her. And like I consider that another very foundational year for me, and not necessarily in a positive way. Like watching my mom die, trying to take care of her.
Welcome to Sacred and Strange. All right, well, welcome to Sacred and Strange. My name is Jay. I'm your host. I'm here today with one of my favorite people on the planet, Kyle, who it's not very often you get to say that you meet someone and I think the first conversation you had or we had was, would you like to see my Criterion collection? Which is pretty great. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Kyle is someone who carries just a ton of wisdom. We can't say that we're necessarily young men anymore, but for his age and what he's walked through, he's carried a ton of wisdom, ton of empathy and compassion, raw honesty, all the things that you need to mix together to make someone that you definitely want in your corner. So I'm really excited to have him on today. I'm really excited for this conversation to see where it goes. And Kyle, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man, and I appreciate you having me on. It's always good to talk with you. It has been a long journey together, going from broke people unable to cook at 18. I remember you in our first year of school together made us chicken parmesan one night because I think it was the only recipe you knew how to make. And it felt like such a gourmet meal after like months of cooking frozen chicken tenders and eating like toast. It was just
Oh
incredible. That's
man.
what I always think of when I think of our first time living together.
I think the chicken tenders might have been gourmet back then too. I'm pretty sure we were living off of ramen and like ketchup sandwiches and stuff. And
We were
cheap bags of cereal.
heavy supporters of Tyson food goods.
Yeah, for real. Kyle, so we moved to Reading at the same time. You from Indiana, me from New York, back 14 years ago. You are still in Reading and
Yeah.
you've really set up camp there and got married and settled down and you're in the middle of, well, you went back to school to, I guess some might argue, an actual school. Uh,
No longer in Christian Hogwarts,
yeah.
unfortunately.
But why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and what landed you out there and what you're doing now? And yeah, let's go from there.
Yeah, all right, man. Sounds good. Yeah, as I said, like at 18, I was trying to figure out what to do. I grew up Christian and I grew up in a charismatic Christian church. But at the same time, like I also went to like a Christian private school and it was a different theological background. They were pretty conservative, like Calvinist Baptists. And so that had been my understanding and like framework for knowing God. Like I grew up going to this like kind of charismatic church, but then a lot of like my theological education came from this very kind of conservative Baptist background. And so when I turned 18, I really had a lot of struggles with doubt and trying to figure out who God was, like what I thought about him and stuff like that. And especially at 18, I was like, man, like I had a hard time separating God from my relationship with my dad. And I often projected some of my feelings and difficulty in my relationship with my dad onto God. And then combining that with that kind of very super Calvinistic, super conservative theological background. And so just had this idea of God as being like really distant and really angry and always like looking out for what kind of mistakes you're going to make. And it just like really soured my relationship with God. It's not like I didn't want to be a Christian, or at least I would never say that out loud, but I definitely inside was like, man, I don't know what I feel about this. And at the time, like there was like this worship band called Jesus Culture getting really big, and my church started playing their music, and my church ended up going to, or my youth group ended up going to some of their conferences that were near Indiana. And like the way these people started talking about God felt like they were talking about like a different God. Like it felt so different than the God that I was thought I was familiar with. And at one of those conferences, they mentioned BSSM, which is a ministry school that you and I did. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for college. So I had this idea of, man, I want to figure out what I'm going to do about God. And so I was like, man, I'm not feeling good about God. I don't know if I want to believe. I don't know if, how I feel about this. These people suddenly are saying that God is actually really good and kind and loving. And that feels like such a radical idea from the idea of God that I've grown up with. And so I was like, I will give it like 1 year. I'll go to this weird school in California and I'll figure out, man, I'm going to try this out. They say God is a good person and I'm going to go out there for a year and I'll see what happens. And I didn't really actually tell anyone that. I told everyone like, oh man, I want to be in ministry. And I just was kind of lying a little bit. I was not being particularly honest about
We
my
all were, man. We were all. We were either lying to someone or ourselves.
totally, man. Definitely was not being honest with myself and or with others. And so I head out there to see if this God is real. And yeah, and that's how we met. It came out to school. I was 8. I still think it's crazy now that I'm an adult that especially like meeting more people and hearing their stories. I'm like, man, I don't know anyone besides like people who did school with us or my wife that moved out at 18 and moved thousands of miles away from their family. That's just not as common of an experience. And I'm kind of like, wow, that's crazy. And then I lived at a college dorm for a couple months with these guys, and they were like, this is too expensive. What if we just get our own place?
Which I
And
think
then
ended up being more expensive in the long run.
totally,
Maybe.
yeah. And
Uh,
we like bought discount church pews as furniture because we
yeah,
couldn't afford anything.
yeah. In the middle of a Dust Bowl town in Northern California.
Yeah. Thankfully, Reading has gotten a little bit better, but man, it was a pretty rough place in 2011.
It was something, man. It is fun to think back and be like, it's like this season where it was like, what were we thinking while also being like, wow, God will show up when you make a space and you intentionally say, I'm going to do something crazy with the heart of, I just want to get close. I just want to see
Yeah.
if you're real. I just want to know what you're doing. And yeah, it was different for me, I think, because I had already lived out on my own because I had just graduated college. I was a
Yeah.
little bit older than you guys. But man, those first few months of being like a 22-year-old with a bunch of 18-year-olds.
I know we used to call you Mama J.
Yes, you did. That's no one listening can call me that though. It was an interesting time. You guys learned a lot. We all learned a lot. You guys really grew a lot as far as I think your maturity in that you had specifically with your roommate a ton of conflict who's now like your brother. You guys had the
Yeah.
same birthday. You guys were like complete opposite ends of the spectrum and now you're like complete brothers, which is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Josh is now my best friend, despite the fact that he drove me crazy at 18. And now we're like, next couple weeks from now, we're going like camping in the woods together.
Yeah.
Here we are almost 15 years later. But yeah, that's crazy. We had some pretty wild experiences in that house. We shoved way more people in that house than we ever told the landlord.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and got people called on us because Josh wouldn't stop sitting on the roof
Oh, I
and
forgot
violating the
about that.
safety rules.
I forgot about that. Yeah, and we definitely somehow didn't kill anyone with trying to grill and none of us really knowing how to use a charcoal grill and throwing lighter fluid definitely onto the meat we were cooking. It was lots and lots of stories, man. Lots of really good
Yeah,
stories. Lots of good times
it's
and
great stories, man. I remember a couple years ago, I was in therapy, and an activity that my therapist had me do was like imagining a safe place or a place that I remember really fondly, and it was that house. That
Mm.
year of being 18, living with you all, figuring out how to be an adult, having so many like laughs, but then also so many like vulnerable bonding sessions and crying
Yeah, man.
about how we all had bad dads except for Jay, who had a good dad and just couldn't relate to any of us.
I did have a good dad, but I could definitely real.
And so like I still again like almost a decade and a half later look back on those memories as a really positive time and place in my life. And yeah, it just really was like a formative time for me, just as like a person and then also figuring out God. Like I got there and again, like I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. Like it was like really funny. Like I remember can't remember if it was like in like my interview for school or something else. Like I had to basically say like how I knew Bethel or like what books I'd read. And I was like, I'd read one, but I don't think I think I'd heard like Bill Johnson preach once. And I'm like, and the more I thought about it, I was like, this is ridiculous. I have moved 2,000 miles away from my home and I like don't even really know these people or know anything about them.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know the like worship music and I've been to like one conference and I decided, wow, what if instead of college, I pay these people a couple $1,000 to try and teach me about God?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it worked out for me. Like a really important person for me in my life in school. Like we had these things because there was a couple thousand people in school, so we got split up into these things called revival groups, and like each one had the pastor over it. And in my first year, I was with this pastor named John Sturgis, who became a
Mhm.
really formative person for my life. And I was like dealing with all this like anger and pain with God and really wrestling with this kind of Calvinist Baptist theological background. And my pastor is like a former super Calvinist Baptist pastor. And he's also like this like kind of older fatherly grandfather figure while I'm also like really sorting through complicated feelings about my dad and our
Mhm.
relationship. And it felt like, man, God provided the perfect opportunity in that for me in that season of life. And
Yeah.
I think it's changed as I've gotten older, but especially at that time, like I leaned so heavily on like logic and like intellectual stuff. Like I was honestly a little ponce. It's like I was arrogant. I like thought I was really full of myself and I thought I was super smart. And you know what God did during that year, if like just really kind of bypassed my brain. We're charismatic Christians and Bethel is a kind of crazy place. And so like during my first year, I like spent 6 months just getting, I don't know what the proper theological term is, blasted by the Holy Spirit and having Jay drive me
I think
around
that
and
is, I'm pretty sure Irenaeus coined that term.
and Jay driving me around in his tiny little silver car while I was out of my mind experiencing the love of God.
You weren't the only one in that car though, so you were in good company as far as who everyone else was usually. I was the DD or D&D from
DT.
coming from church.
Yeah. 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 And those experiences, like I remember it was like January of our first year. Like I was talking with like we all went on like missions trips as a part of school like in the spring and I was talking with like the leader of my missions trip at the time and they were just asking me like how I was doing and I remember like in January I was like I could just feel like something had changed. Like it had like months and months of like these experiences and encounters with God and the goodness of God and his kindness. And I was like, man, like I was talking with this person, I was like, something just changed in me this week. Like growing up, like I spent a lot of time in my teenage years, like feeling really depressed. And then even into my early adulthood, like really struggling with chronic depression. And I just thought, well, man, that's just my normal. Like my normal is to
Mm.
be down. I'm a depressed person or I'm sad. I remember there was just like this week and this conversation where I was like, man, actually, I think my normal is to feel okay and feel happy now. And it was just like
Mm.
months of these experiences, like with the love of God, did something internally without involving my brain. Like it's still like a weird experience looking back on it. God just bypassed all of these like barriers that I had up towards him, like all these intellectual defenses that I used to protect myself against him and just worked on my heart in that year. And yeah, it's still, again, as I said, like still is like this really formative experience for me and still friends, very close friends with most of the people that I lived in that house. Yeah. So it was just really special time that first year for us living together and really did a lot for me and really set the foundation for who I am as an adult. And it's interesting, like revisiting those experiences and seeing how they still influence me today. And I've gone through a lot in the last 14 years, and but I always come back to that 2011, 2012 year
Mm.
because it shaped so much of who I am as a person. And going from where I was at as a teenager, and then in 1 year, like really getting convinced this idea that God is good. And even when I have gone through really difficult situations now as an adult, and I've had times where I've really struggled with more anger with God or more disappointment with God, as angry as I can get with him or as frustrated as I can get when he doesn't do what I want him to do, like I still have these feelings from God about how kind he is and how good he is. And I think the reason that I can still connect with those ideas is because of those experiences that we all had together in that year. And then also like thinking about you introduced me like saying I'm a person of like real honesty. And I was thinking about, man, when we met, I really didn't feel like that was true. Like I remember talking with people afterwards, like when I moved back to Indiana for the summer, and I realized I was like, man, I feel like up until that point in my life, I'd never been vulnerable in my life until I got to Reading. I love Indiana. I love the Midwest. It's still a very special place to me, but it is not a place known for its deep emotional honesty and vulnerability. Not a place where a lot of people are just wearing their hearts on their sleeve, talking about their emotions all the time. Definitely not the norm of the culture. And then growing up, my family, their relationship with emotions was volatile. My mom's
Mm.
side of the family were like kind of blow up and get into fights kind of people and then come back together and cry about how much you love each other. And then my
That
dad's
sounds
side
like
of the
your mom might be a New Yorker.
family. My mom is a very stiff upper lip British person. I don't know. And then my dad, his family is Canadian, Eastern European, never talk about your emotions, don't cry in front of anyone kind of people. And coming into this environment, living with these young men, all trying to figure out God and adulthood. And then we were all having these powerful experiences with God and sitting on the floor, hugging each other, crying, and then eating chicken nuggets or chicken strips and ramen.
That's what brotherhood's about, man. It's just crying and eating nuggets and ramen together. That's what it is. We did watch Braveheart with our shirts off, so there was that too. But I think
So funny.
when when I think to like what I've seen you walk through and stuff, I think I've got two questions. I think one is, was there something you can look back to? Because you're still, when I think of you, you're still logical. Like you're still a very logical person, but you have, I think, at least on the outside looking in, it seems like you've cracked the secret sauce of like, how do I be a logical person while also giving my feelings room to breathe and to be real and be honest. And that's not something that someone who leans a bit more into their logical brain, it's not easy for them to do, right? Because you can almost think away your feelings or think away what you're going through or what you've experienced. And I think to even not that long ago, just you walking through the stuff with your mom, going back to doing all that stuff and moving back to Indiana for a season to be present and to be with her. And I remember talking to you on the phone and stuff and checking in and thinking like you could have easily been like, oh yeah, I'm good. A logical person would do. And I remember you being like, no, this sucks. This is really hard. This is really painful. I'm really angry. So what was the thing that kind of clicked for you that I guess bridged that is my question. What was it, a single moment? Was it specific people? Was it over time? Like what made you get back into or get into a normalcy of I can be logical, but I can also feel what I feel and give that space.
Yeah. Again, I think going back to, I think it's been a lifetime of, or at least in my adulthood, like a lifetime of discovery for being vulnerable, being present emotionally. But yeah, I think going back to that first year together, I think like realize have spent a lot of my life on an ebb and flow journey with like shame and self-hatred. And especially when I was a teenager, like I had a lot of self-hatred. Like I had struggled with like suicidal ideation when I was in my mid-teens, and I just had this idea, like this deep-founded idea that I wasn't good on the inside. And that's why like vulnerability felt so scary to me. I'm like, oh man, if I open up and people start to see all the junk inside me, they're gonna reject me just like I reject myself. And so having those experiences both with God and then with you guys and with other people at BSM and realizing, oh man, I can start to be like 1% vulnerable and people aren't rejecting me. Like people aren't like looking at me in shame. Oh man, like these guys, these really close friends of mine are actually like really empathetic towards me or can relate to my experiences, like giving me love. Or like I had with this pastor, John, like he could listen to me talk about how much anger and pain I have towards God or anger and pain towards, this specific part of the church. And he just loved me. And it was like, oh man, I thought like this idea of like perfectionism, like I have to be perfect. And I projected that onto God. Oh man, like God is never going to love me because I make mistakes or I sin or I do all this stuff. And like all of these things, like so it wasn't like just one moment, but all of these like small experiences of being just a little bit more vulnerable. When I think back to 18, I was like, oh man, this feels so vulnerable. And now I'm like, oh my God, like I was like being vulnerable at all. I was just like, oh man, I'm angry at my dad. And I was like,
And guess what?
oh
We all are.
no. Yeah, I was like, oh man, that's so vulnerable to say. And now I'm like, oh, that's too funny. That's not very vulnerable. But like those just like taking those little steps and like getting empathy, getting love, getting kindness convinced me like, oh man, like I could be safe to a certain level. And as I've gotten to be an adult, the level of vulnerability that I feel safe with has expanded. But
Mm,
again, I think like a lot of things in my life, like it comes back to that kind of foundational year when I was like 18 and 19 and things that have happened since have really expanded on that. Like I mentioned, like my mom, and she passed away a couple years ago, and it was like the hardest season of my life. Like my mom got ALS, and in like less than 2 years, went from being totally fine to being gone. And ALS basically like slowly like robs your body's ability to do anything. Like your mom just slowly got more and more paralyzed and got confined to a bed and then couldn't feed herself, couldn't do anything. And so I was newly married and my wife and I moved out to Indiana to my childhood home to take care of her. And like I considered that another very foundational year for me. Like
yeah.
and not necessarily in a positive way. Like watching my mom die, trying to take care of her, probably one of the most traumatic experiences that I've had in my life, and still working through it 5 years later, but without some level of vulnerability like that I had gotten when I was 18 and 19. Like I definitely wouldn't still be married. I don't know what I'd be like today. And those lessons of vulnerability that I learned through all these different relationships, both with you guys or with leaders in my life, with God, like, the lesson of being able to be open and being vulnerable has like really been an anchor to get me through some extremely difficult experiences in my life.
How do you keep, I don't know if this is something you consciously do, but like, how do you maintain that core value? Because I was thinking of it would be transparency is easy, right? Like, it's easy to be like, oh, I'm going through this. But the next step of that is the vulnerability of I'm going through this and please be with me in it, right? Or I'm going through this and please speak into it. Please, I give you permission to be present and to help me carry this a bit. Is that a conscious thing that you're aware of? Would it be easy to slip back into not being vulnerable for you still? Or is it like, how did you integrate those experiences into what seems like a core value for you? I just think it's important because I think a lot of us, myself included, who do lean into, I can convince myself of anything, right? I can talk my way out of anything in my head. Like I can have conversations before I've had conversations. So how do you stay present enough with yourself to be like, I need to actually push this to the next level?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, like I'm thinking about like emotional health and stuff like that. As you mentioned, like at the beginning, I'm in graduate school. I'm going back for my master's in social work. My goal is to be like clinical social worker and a licensed therapist. These are things that I really care about, which is always funny because emotions have often been a very difficult thing for me. And now I'm like, what if I made my career emotions, which is a funny thing. But I think like when it comes to you're talking about like with vulnerability and stuff, like I think one of the most important skills that we can develop is self-awareness. The
Yeah.
ability to like really be honest with ourselves, understand ourselves, I think is like the foundation to like growth as a person. And an important aspect of like human relationships, mental health, emotional health for me is like our attachment style. Attachment style is from our earliest age, research has shown that like our attachment style is even developed before we are born. Like that our experiences in the womb and our experiences with our mother, those things, like even before we're conscious, start to develop like the way that we relate to others, the way that we do what is called attachment, the forming of human relationships. And that continues like within the first couple of years of our life. These really formative childhood development experiences are foundational to how we will relate to people later in our life. There's three attachment styles, or sorry, four attachment styles. There's secure attachment, like where I have a healthy sense of connection with others. There's like avoidant attachment, where in order to keep myself safe, I tend to like keep others at a distance or push them away. And then there's anxious attachment where in order to feel safe, I need to like grab, hold on to people and I need them close. Otherwise, I'm going to feel really anxious. And then there's disorganized attachment, which is a mix of anxious and avoidant at the same time. And I know for me, like growing up with my experiences as a kid and experiences with my family, like I am an avoidant attacher for the most part. Like I have some experiences with secure attachment, but when I am in a more dysfunctional state or I'm really stressed, or dealing with difficult emotions for me, I go into avoidance a lot. And you talked about like, how do I maintain vulnerability or being present? Like, first, I'm honest about myself. Oh man, like I am someone who, if I really let myself go with what I wanted, I would be avoidant all the time. I would never be vulnerable and never feel emotions. Like I'm like 14 years on this vulnerable journey, and I'll be honest, I still don't like vulnerability. It still feels vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's I'm around like these people through my wife's job and through our friendships that are like a little bit more well known in like the emotional health space. And people must be like, oh, people ask me sometimes, oh man, it must be so fun being friends with these people or like having these experiences. And I'm like, no, I love them, but they make me be vulnerable all the time. And it's not a fun experience for me. Like it's a good experience for me. It's just I'll go to therapy and like my wife is the opposite for me. She like loves therapy. And I'm like, I've been in therapy for like years and I still hate it. And the funny thing is I'm
And you
working
want
to
to
be a
be a therapist.
and I'm working to be a licensed therapist, but I'm honest with myself that I'm like, yeah, every time that I go into therapy, I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna have to be vulnerable and be open about my emotions. And I hate that. But it's, I also know that the choice to be present, the choice to be vulnerable, the choice to like experience real connection, which can't be had without vulnerability, has always been a beneficial thing for me. It's like
Mm,
I really can be resistant and avoidant about therapy, which again is ironic being wanting to be a therapist. But I choose to go because I know, oh man, like as soon as I get all over that hurdle, that initial like avoidance resistance, oh, I see the benefit for me. It's every time I feel that speed bump inside me towards vulnerability or towards being present, I'm like, oh, I have to get over that speed bump, and then I get the
yeah.
benefit that comes from that. And I think that's just like being honest with ourselves. I think working with people over the last 14 years, like I've worked in some way of social work or some or stuff like that for a good portion of my career, and just seeing the level of resistance people have towards these kind of concepts is directly often related to like the issues that they have in their life, like whether that's issues in their marriage or their relationships or issues with their family. I work in the criminal justice system, like issues with substance abuse and stuff like that. Like our resistance towards like awareness of ourselves, of towards vulnerability, of towards openness and connection to others is often a source of issues in our life. And that is very true in my life.
Yeah.
I'm married. I'm about to celebrate 8 years of marriage next month. And yeah, a lot of the issues that I have had to deal with in my marriage is because of my avoidance, because of my resistance to vulnerability and openness, and the way that I have kept my marriage, even through very difficult seasons in our lives, was by choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to open myself up to connection. It's part of it, the choice of what Shin was like, realizing, man, this like foundational attachment inside of me that wants to tell me like avoidance is gonna be safe for me is actually lying to me. And it's been lying to me
Mm,
my entire life. Like the reality is like when I've been in avoidance are actually some of the most difficult and painful experiences of my life versus when I choose to be vulnerable, which can be a painful experience. But for me, in my life, in my relationships, has always led to the feeling of love, like the feeling of empathy, of receiving kindness in my life, despite the painful choice and the difficult choice that it can be for me.
yeah, that's so good, man. While you're talking, I'm like asking myself, like, this is probably gonna be blanket statements. Forgive me if it is. Whoever out there is gonna be offended, you can just be offended. That's fine too. But like, why does the church avoid this? Like, I can think through so many experiences, especially as like a young man, whether in my mid to late teens, early 20s, where if the church normalized vulnerability, and it's ironic, right? Because I can't think of any man more vulnerable than Jesus. But if the church had normalized the idea of vulnerability coming, I'm not talking about confession, where it's like I'm vulnerability is me confessing my sins, but just having a system or a culture of I need to bring my presence and be present with other people, even when I'm super low. You think about all the different stuff, the deconstruction stuff, and all this stuff going on in the church right now. It's would be we be looking at that? Would this be happening within our culture as a church or as the church if we had just normalized, what you're talking about, like self-awareness? Come, be a mess. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna suck and it's gonna be hard, but come be a mess and we'll be a mess with you. Come, come bring your stuff. Come be real with where you're at without fear of, well, if you feel that way, you must be in sin or you must not have enough faith or you just need to experience the goodness of God. It's, okay, yeah, maybe, but also he said that I would be comforted, right? He said he would send the comforter when I was feeling low. He said that he would be present in the middle of my persecution. Like, I don't know, man. I mean, first of all, going all the way back to the beginning, I didn't realize charismatic Calvinists existed.
To be fair, I wasn't Calvinist. I just had gone to a Baptist Calvinist school, and bless my charismatic church growing up, giving like systematic theology was not their deal. And but I going to Baptist private school, their deal was like, here's theology. And I was like, oh my God, this just makes it seem like God is really angry and he's created people to die in hell. That really messed with my view of God.
Well, having that experience, and also like you worked in, because you volunteered in the school for a long time, even after we had all graduated and have been involved with different aspects of ministry too. Like, why do you think we just haven't done a great job? Maybe we're getting better at it recently, but like we just haven't done a good job historically of creating this space when the gospel's full of a Christ, of a Messiah who actually asks us to be vulnerable with him.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about reminds me of two things. Like, I remember I really went to a real therapist for the first time after my mom died because I was like on the verge of a mental breakdown. And I did this form of therapy called EMDR, which is like a therapy for specifically for trauma. And I remember talking about some of this stuff with my therapist at the time, and I was like, man, I feel so resistant to pain. And I'm like, I know, man, I need to be like present with my pain. And he was like, that's normal. That's humanity. Pain is the reminder that something is wrong, and none of us want to feel that. Like, there's nothing wrong with you for not wanting to embrace and be present with your pain. That is just a part of human experience, is not liking pain. And I was like, oh, okay. I have permission for it to be hard. And it's again, like now I'm 15, 14 years into the journey of trying to be vulnerable, and it's still hard. And I don't know that it will ever not be hard for me. So I think in general, just as humanity, I think being present with ourselves, acknowledging our pain is a difficult human experience for most people. But I think, especially when thinking about my frame of reference is the American evangelical church and charismatic church, I think that there's still a big part of our belief system that it is, when it comes to being a good Christian, or even, I don't think most people would verbalize it this way, but even like salvation, that I think there's still a large portion of people that unconsciously believe that it's our work. They're, I know I grew up with that, the idea that, man, I've got to be perfect for God, that I'm
Yeah.
somehow earning God's love or God's kindness towards me, despite the fact that we do all this preaching and talking about God for so loved the world that he sent his only son to die for us. I still think that there's, at least I can't speak to the rest of the world, but my experience in the American church is there's still a lot of people walking around with this unconscious driving belief that, yeah, God, Jesus died on the cross and he wiped the slate clean, but I still got to do all the
Yeah.
work to
Yeah.
stay perfect, instead of the really radical idea of Christianity, in my opinion, compared to the rest of the world's religion, which is God did the work for us. Like, I remember in school we had to read this book about Smith Wigglesworth, and I don't know the exact quote, but it was something along the
Good old
lines
Smitty.
of old Smitty, something along the lines, he said, of God made it as simple as possible. Just believe. I know for myself, I often feel like I don't live that. I still feel like, oh man, like I have to be perfect. Like I have to
Yeah.
do all these things
Yeah.
to be the good Christian, to earn God's love. When, if we're reading the gospel, old Smitty is right. He said, just believe. Like I remember I forget exactly where it is. Paul writes that it's by the faith of Christ that we are saved. And often I think a lot of people read it's by faith in Christ that we are saved. But the actual Greek says it's by essentially Christ's faith that we are saved.
Mm.
That it's like he has done the work, like, and yet I still feel like I'm having to be the one to put in the real effort, when I'm like, actually, it was Jesus and his sacrifice for us that was the real effort.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it, is like we in the church still have this idea of, man, I have to be perfect for God. I have to do all these things to meet, to rise to the expectations of the, what really is of the law. I think a lot of us still live under
Yeah.
this idea of the law, man, that there are the Ten Commandments, there's all these rules that we got to follow, and I've got to live up to them. And if I don't live up to them, I'm not a good Christian, despite the fact that the whole ministry and life of Jesus and all these writings of Paul are all about, hey, you can never meet the law. You're never going to be good enough. That's why Jesus came to fulfill the law. And yet I think a lot of
Sure.
us as Christians still live with the law in our heads.
Yeah.
And I think that part of that is comes into why we're resistant to vulnerability. Like we're resistant to like showing other people that we're not perfect. We're resistant to showing other
Yeah.
people like, man, hey, I still have some real junk that I'm sorting through inside of me, or I still have these parts of me that are really rough around the edges, or these parts of me that I make mistakes, or I act in a way that isn't Christ-like.
Yeah.
Like I'm not perfect yet. And I think that is a difficult experience, especially in my experience with the American church, where the idea is like, man, if you're a Christian, you've got to be perfect. You've got to be the really good person. You've got to meet all these standards. And it's not that there isn't a thing that we should be doing, but if our standard is being the perfect Christian, we're always going to fail. We're always going to fall short of
Yeah.
whatever that standard we've set for ourselves. And I think that goes into a lot of why I think vulnerability is really difficult for Christians, or at least that's my thought.
Yeah, I think that last part that you just brought up rings true. I think even thinking of culture I grew up in as a pastor's kid and all that sort of stuff of I actually can't be vulnerable because if I'm vulnerable, it's like this weird holiness competition, right? Where it's like I need to have the best external life and mask to show that God is at work in me. And if I were to show a weakness in that area, right, it's well, there must be something wrong. And not just there must be something wrong generalized, there must be something wrong with me. And I think that's unfortunately something that we haven't done a great job. Again, I think we're getting better, but I don't think we've done a great job as the church of making the space for people to be messes. And you're talking about Galatians right there. It's the you're not under the law. You can't because the law can't save you.
Yeah.
It's not capable of saving you. But yeah, man. I mean, I think there's so much we could still get into. We haven't even covered yet that I think you're like the first person in 100 years to get malaria in Reading.
Yeah, definitely the first person. It was a great experience. I had lots of medical students come see me because it was a rare experience to see someone dying of malaria.
Somewhere floating on social media, there's definitely a picture of all of us around
Going like me going like this while I've been unshowered for a week, and you guys are all on your way to the beach.
Yeah. Not that was definitely a vulnerable moment for you. But I do, as we're gonna have to do a part two or a follow up at some point for
Yeah,
sure.
sounds good.
But I do, you put something down that I thought I had heard most of your stories at this point. I've never heard this story, but this is gonna be complete left field from anything we've been talking about. I need to hear about this UFO
Okay. Yeah.
because when I think UFO, I think Indiana cornfields, cows, nothing.
It was on a pretty rural road. Well, there was no cornfield. There was a large tube factory, though. The Bull Moose Tube Factory. Yeah, it is definitely one of the weird. We've talked about the sacred. Now we got to talk about the strange.
Yes, let's
Yeah,
go.
it is definitely one of my weird experiences. I don't think it was aliens, but it was weird. I had these really good friends in high school. I grew up in northern Indiana, which is around any of you are football fans around the University of Notre Dame. Go Fighting Irish. So it's a very like agricultural area and industrial area, at least when I was growing up. I don't know what it is like now. It's been a couple of years since I've been back, but I lived in this town called Mishawaka, went to high school in this town called Elkhart, and one of my closest friends, his home was in Elkhart, and we'd hang out until 2 a.m. because we were teenagers and slept in until 1 p.m. So I
Yep.
was driving home from my friend's house, driving past the tube factory at again like 2 a.m. There's nobody on the road, and I am driving in my little car and I see this huge fireball, like several hundred feet, like above my car, like in front of it. And normally I would be like, oh, it's just like a meteor or something like that. Not that I've ever seen a meteor, but that's what I would
Yeah. Because
assume.
that would definitely be totally normal. There's a meteor right above my car. This is normal.
So it's like up in the sky. But the weird thing is, at least when I think of a shoot, like I've seen like shooting stars and stuff before, but then they like zip through the air. They go like
Hmm.
super fast and like they like disappear really quickly. But this one was like moving really slow. So it's like this like ball of yellow orange fire with this again, not like a shooting star. Like when I think of like a shooting star, there's this like straight tail, like zips through the air. This had this like zigzag crackling tail coming off of itself, slowly moving through the air. And I like stared at it for like several seconds, like in awe. And then at least what it looked like to me, it like zoomed off into the air, into the darkness. And that is my UFO story. I still to this day I have no idea what it was. It's weird. It
Give
doesn't.
us your theory, though. Give us your theory. What do you think it was?
Like
Was
genuinely,
this an
it is.
Ezekiel moment? Was it like a wheel within a wheel covered in eyes?
Yeah. To be honest, it is still. It's probably like the one experience in my life where I still have questions. I'm still like, I don't know what that was. Like, this really slow because like I was like maybe going 40 miles an hour, and it looked like it was going like 40 or 50 miles an hour. And again, it was like several hundred feet up in the air, just like slowly moving along with this weird zigzag tail coming off it. And then like almost in Star Wars where they like go into hyperdrive and like
Chewie punched it.
punched it. Yeah. And I don't know, man. Like when I'm not a UFO believer, I'm not a Bigfoot believer, but I do have an appreciation for it. Well, I enjoy listening. I It's a funny thing to my wife because I'll
Feel like
listen
you
to
just
like,
patted me on the head and said, "Nice
okay,
one, little buddy."
it's okay. Like my wife always laughs at me because I'll listen to like paranormal podcasts, but I don't believe any of it. I just enjoy the stories. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
want it to be true. And this is like my weird UFO story. But when I think of like UFOs, yeah, I think of the metal saucer in the air, like the little green men coming out. I don't hear like giant, slow moving fireball story that then hyperspace jumps into the next dimension. I maybe there are UFO stories like that, but I haven't heard them. And so yeah.
There are.
Ooh,
There are.
okay. I
You
feel
gotta
like
look
I'm
up like Dyatlov's Pass. Have you heard that one?
okay.
You gotta look that one up.
Okay.
That one's
Okay.
I don't know, man. That's cool. I would think around probably where you were, there's probably some Air Force bases or something, because always in those Midwest kind of
Yeah,
open
a couple
areas.
hours from me. It's a pretty big Air Force base.
Yeah, it could have been something like that, but I'm gonna keep my speculations a little more tame.
I want
I
to
think it's
hear. I don't have any answers. I'm down to hear some UFO theories.
yeah, I don't know. I've been leaning a little bit more recently into the idea of less extraterrestrial, more interdimensional
Oh,
sort of.
I'm totally on board with that. If Bigfoot, again, I'm not necessarily a Bigfoot believer, but I think if Bigfoot is real, I think he's
Mhm.
interdimensional.
Yeah, I think scripture makes so much space for that stuff. That's when you talk first, second, third heaven stuff. I'm like, that could easily be interdimensional stuff. The whole Hebrew mindset of even heaven and earth, our idea of it being a gap, that's not the biblical mindset. It's overlapping. What is that? That sounds interdimensional to me. And not that God has to fit in the box, but obviously he's made a framework for creation that is functional and within its space. I don't know, man. That could be something. Listen, if you were to come to me and say interdimensional beings have been working with our government and they're creating technology that they're just slowly releasing to us, you'd get a good head nod out of me. I'd probably be like, yeah, I can see it. We went from horse and buggy to computers this big in 100 years.
Yeah. To be honest, I could get more on board with the interdimensional beings than I could get with extraterrestrials. I think that is easier to believe for me. Like, I think, yeah, especially like with what you're talking about, like the idea of the physical and the spiritual. And then there's like all this weird stuff in the Bible. I think, again, like growing up Christian, you're like, oh man, there's God, there's angels, there's devils, and then there's demons. But then if you like read the Old Testament, you're like, there's also like these other guys in there. And we don't really hear a lot about them, but they're out there. There's these like weird spiritual beings out there,
Bro,
and we don't get a whole lot of info about them, but they're out there in the Bible, and it's some weird stuff. And I
the
think a lot of
Bible's a
times we
bigger
just kind of like
playground, I think.
glaze over it because we're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think the Bible's a bigger playground than we give it credit for sometimes because it is growing up in the 90s. It was a lot of it's either God or it's demons.
Totally.
There's no in between. Like that's it. It's God or it's
Exactly.
demons. And now I'm kind of that's I think it's actually a lot bigger than that. We'll
Interesting.
trade some conspiracy theories when we definitely have you back again. I'm going to give you some space to digest and become a believer.
It's good.
But man, I appreciate your wisdom and your story. We only really touched the surface.
Yeah.
Like I said, I because I visited you when you were going through that with your mom. I stayed like a night or
Yes.
two when I was heading back from California and got to see some of that firsthand. And I remember leaving your parents' house and being like, I thinking of my mom or thinking of just being
Mhm.
like, I don't know how I would have been definitely looking much shaggier than you looked and probably hadn't showered in weeks and just been a mess. Because that's generally that has to be one of the hardest experiences any person can go through to see
Yeah.
your mom. And you walked through that with so much integrity and honor. And I know it was hard and I know that you were all over the place, but you showed up. And I was always being super impressed that you chose to show up like that because you could have just stayed in Reading and you'd been like, I'm praying for your mom, but you were there. And I think that's such a just an amazing story, amazing piece of your story that was really hard that we didn't even really get to touch on. But I say all that to say I really respect you, I really honor who you are and the man you are and the encourager you are. I'm so thankful for your story and so thankful for how you've walked it out. It's such an amazing testimony that myself and others we can look at and be like, man, that's a good man. That's a man after God, and I want to be like that. So, thanks for jumping in. Thanks for sharing even just a little bit of it. And what I love to do with anyone who's on is just pray for us, pray us out.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, man. Yeah. Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for who you are. We thank you for just the experiences that you've had with Jay and I, and then the rest of the world, just showing your goodness and your kindness and your never-ending compassion towards us. And we just ask that you continue to reveal to all of us on this podcast, all of those listening, and all of us out there, just the type of father you are and the love that you have towards humanity, and just continue to help us be vulnerable with each other, with ourselves, and with you, that we can continue to just have foundational connections with each other and with you, God. And we just pray that all in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, talk soon.
Sounds good.